crime scene, that kind of case, Michael?
I don't think there is. One of the concerns that gets raised is privacy. But once you're in the realm of litigation, that, I guess, interest in privacy is typically outweighed by the need for our court system to try and arrive at the correct decision, to do justice. And so, as a result, if there is information that can allow it to determine, who's committed a wrong or who's committed a crime, then the court system will usually require that the information be provided.
But the real risk, I suppose, comes, as everybody has always said, in a less benign and controlled environment. When you're talking to Siri or Alexa at home and maybe saying unwise things which come back to bite you because they're listening and storing what you say all the time.
I think that's right. It's not that, you don't really expect that the criminal who's planning, to kill somebody is going to be saying those sorts of things, which could, demonstrate preparation of a crime or some sort of guilt. It's more, I think, are we going to have recorded things that could be used in, say, a family law case or a personal injury case where somebody perhaps inadvertently says things that might actually be probative of them having done the wrong thing, but equally taken out of context could suggest that they've done something that is not in fact correct.
Yeah, or threatened to, because we all lose our temper and we've all, in some shape or form, said things we regret. So there's all that stuff going on as well, which will be difficult to sort through, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the difficulties with sort of these recordings or the information that gets picked up is that it doesn't necessarily, it's not capturing sort of, I guess, the sort of facial expressions. It's not capturing, movements that might sort of give a different colouring to the words that are said. All you get is effectively just the bare text sitting there. And that can then be interpreted in a number of ways.
Do you think, it's interesting, I think there's already been a case in which a bloke said he was woken up by a fire in his house and he promptly rushed outside. That was his story, but his Fitbit showed he had been engaged in lifting heavy things, which turned out to be removing his worldly goods from the home. This may prove very popular, Michael, as a way of identifying exactly what you were doing. That is part of the danger, isn't it, that you open Pandora's box?
Well, I think the problem is what do you say happened because the person was engaged in that labour? So you can you can draw various conclusions from that, and so there needs to be a way in which you test the reliability of the information. But then I suppose the other thing is, how do you know that the recording is in fact accurate? Yeah, and
yes, we don't have time to talk about that, but I think we can all understand that this is going to be a minefield for lawyers. Thank you, Professor Michael Legg on the panel today. Neville Gibson, Ella Henry, lovely to have your company, both of you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
That's us, and we will return tomorrow. Thanks for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint with John Campbell on the way.
Tō te mai rā e hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, the government looks at a legislative response to the problem of on-solds in Christchurch, and homeowners still battling EQC share their stories with the Minister and EQC's interim chairwoman. Has Ron Mark been using Defence Force helicopters to get home? Auckland's mayor looks at solutions to the problem of wastewater making the city's beaches a health risk. Bottled water, not only does much of it come in plastic, some of it contains plastic too. Stephen Hawking's biographer describes his lightning-fast mind, his most important work, and his celestial objects dress-up parties, and inside the highly competitive world of Polyfest. All that and more coming up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. The minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission has met with Christchurch claimants and promised a culture change is on the cards at EQC. In what was described as an emotional meeting, the group was promised individual case managers for the 2,500 people with outstanding claims to speed up the process. Many have purchased homes with undisclosed damage and then found their private insurer is unwilling to provide cover, leaving them hugely out of pocket. Megan Woods says a law change may be required to help this group. For now, she says the current law needs clarifying.
They've bought a house, they think they've done everything right, and they're left in a situation where no one seems to be liable for very expensive repairs. We need to clarify the law in that area, and that's exactly why the government's moving really swiftly on work around how it is that we can do test cases to clarify those areas of law.
EQC Minister Megan Woods. The Privacy Commissioner has joined the police watchdog in criticising a bogus traffic checkpoint in Lower Hutt, which targeted euthanasia supporters. The police say they ran the checkpoint in an effort to obtain details of those at an Exit International meeting because they were concerned about their suicide risk. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has ruled the checkpoint was unlawful and unjustified. The Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, agrees, saying he's very concerned that the police told the authority bogus checkpoints had been used in the past for intelligence gathering.
It's quite clear that police have the authority to stop people and gather their information only in specified circumstances. Abusing that legal authority given to them should not be sanctioned, and I hope that police amend their practices to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future.
John Edwards says the police questioned the euthanasia supporters about a socially and politically sensitive subject causing them harm. The National Party is accusing the Defence Minister of totally inappropriate use of military aircraft. On several occasions, Ron Mark has had military aircraft collect him from his hometown of Masterton and fly him to military events and then fly him home again. National's Mark Mitchell says the Air Force is not a taxi service for the Minister and Mr Mark has serious questions to answer. In a statement, Mr Mark said none of the flights were for personal use and were taking him to official engagements. The Russian ambassador to the United Nations has slammed Britain and the US over accusations Moscow is behind last week's nerve agent attack on a former Russian spy and his daughter in Salisbury. Among other measures, Britain is expelling 23 Russian diplomats in retaliation. At an emergency session of the UN Security Council, the US ambassador Nikki Haley directly pointed the finger at Russia for the first time. Russia's ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, responded by continuing to deny any involvement by Moscow.
We were given an ultimatum and asked to admit within 24 hours that we had committed a crime. In other words, confess. We do not speak the language of ultimatums. We do not use that language with anyone, and we will not allow ourselves to be spoken to in that language either.
The translated words of Russia's UN ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia. Hundreds of Victoria University students marched through Wellington today, calling for the law firm at the centre of sexual misconduct allegations to be suspended from working for the government. Russell McVeigh, which provides legal services to the government, is in the spotlight over allegations against two senior lawyers at its Wellington office 2 years ago, as well as revelations of alcohol-fuelled sex in a boardroom. One of the protest organisers, law student Bethany Patterson, says sexual violence in the profession has been going on too long.
You hear about these kind of things all the time at law school, and I think there's been a lot of tension bubbling under the surface that people have wanted to speak up about it, but until something comes to the public, you can't talk about it if it's not your story, and you want to respect the rights of those victims, and I feel like now we have an opportunity to say that we want the culture to change.
Bethany Patterson says students want all legal firms to improve the way they deal with sexual assault and harassment. The Human Rights Commission is refusing to release documents relating to the sexual harassment of an intern by a senior staff member. RNZ News requested the documents under the Official Information Act. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
The Human Rights Commission insists the staff member received the appropriate punishment for sexually harassing an American intern. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, ordered a review last month, saying he had serious concerns about the mediation process the Commission used. The Commission says privacy and legal privilege considerations trump RNZ News's request for the documents. It says the review, ordered by the Minister, will address the public interest. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
It's 5:05. Sport, and the New Zealand 11 has the upper hand in the England Test squad's warm-up match for the two-test cricket series against the Black Caps, starting in Auckland next week. The two-day match in Hamilton is a day-night game and is being played with a pink ball in preparation for what will be the first day-night test in New Zealand, which starts at Eden Park next Thursday. In reply to the New Zealand 11's first innings of 376 for 9 declared, England a short time ago were 141 for 6. Nico Kerwin, the son of former All Blacks winger John Kerwin, has been named in the New Zealand football squad for the first time. The 22-year-old midfielder is one of 6 uncapped players named by new coach Fritz Schmid for a friendly against Canada in Spain next week. Schmid has chosen not to pick several first-choice players like Burnley's Chris Wood for the friendly that will be played behind closed doors. The England rugby coach Eddie Jones has been left embarrassed after footage emerged of him referring to Ireland as the scummy Irish and also belittling Wales. The video shows Jones giving a talk on leadership to Fuso, the Japanese parent company of England sponsors Mitsubishi. It was uploaded in July last year, but has only come to light ahead of this weekend's final round of the Six Nations when England host Ireland at Twickenham.
Who knows Wales? Is there any Welsh people here? So it's this little shit place that's got 3 million people. 3 million people. Japan's got how many? 125 million.
Jones has apologised for his comments, admitting his choice of words was inexcusable. That's the news.
This Saturday morning, Sir Lloyd Gearing, who's just turned 100, he calls himself a non-theist and says he's certainly not going to start praying now. Australian playwright Joanna Murray-Smith on her homage to the dark and complicated thriller writer Patricia Highsmith, and Professor Larissa Behrendt on the battle to stop the removal of Australian Indigenous children from their families. Join me, Kim Hill, Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. High cloud, a few showers for Northland. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine with variable high cloud. However, a southerly change brings a few showers late tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, including Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape. Cloudy periods and isolated showers. Showers more frequent and possibly heavy tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Nelson, mainly fine but 1 or 2 showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain today with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms about Fiordland and Westland. Rain gradually easing to isolated showers tomorrow. For Marlborough and Canterbury, high cloud, a few showers developing tomorrow with a southerly change. Otago and Southland, rain developing this evening, turning to showers early tomorrow morning, then easing later and fine spells increasing. The Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. This is a strange one, or is it? It's just appeared out of the blue this afternoon, a bit like a helicopter arriving in Masterton. Really, the Defence Minister is denying any inappropriate use of military aircraft on 2 occasions. Ron Mark has had military aircraft collect him from his hometown of Masterton and fly him to events, and then it appears fly him home. Now, National's Defence spokesperson Mark Mitchell is saying official information shows the Air Force NH90 helicopters have repeatedly been diverted to Mr Mark's hometown. Jane Patterson, our political editor, is joining us. Oh, we've got Ron Mark. I think we've got Ron Mark is on the phone. In fact, I'm just going to... he's just been put through now. So, Ron Mark is the Defence Minister. Mark Mitchell is... No, that's not Ron Mark. Mark Mitchell is alleging Ron Mark used NH90 helicopters and a B200 King aircraft repeatedly, and I think that's an important word, had them diverted to Mr Mark's hometown in Masterton, which is, of course, in the Wairarapa, apparently, according to Mark Mitchell, to ferry the Minister from his home to events around the country and back again. Do we have Ron Mark? Are you there, Minister?
Yes, I am. How are you, John?
Very good. Very good indeed.
Lovely to hear your voice.
What's that?
Lovely to hear your voice.
Lovely to hear yours. How often have you done this?
Done what? Diverted aircraft from their scheduled routes to pick me up and run me like a taxi service from Heather and Yonder.
Yeah.
Never.
Okay.
So let's just put some facts.
Look, hold on.
Yeah.
Let's be really matter of fact here. So 29 October, B200, Masterton, departing 0900 hours to Woodburn. It's taking you. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Later the same day, it returns you to Masterton from Woodburn?
No, it wasn't. It was an NH90. It brought me back from off of HMNZS Canterbury.
Okay. So that's out on the B200. What is a B200?
Oh, it's that little plane that's sort of like an executive plane that the Air Force have. I'm not that good on planes, but it's a small plane.
Okay, look, and then you were brought back on an NH90, which is a pretty big chopper, isn't it? That does relief work up in the Pacific, doesn't it?
That's right, yeah. So that was to visit Exercise Katapo 17, to visit all the different nations that were participating in. We flew down into Woodburn, transferred to helicopters NH90. We did a number of visits throughout the exercise area, which is quite large over the whole of the west coast there. And then they brought me back. Now, this was the best recommended route by the Air Force, and we took that option. I was accompanied by senior Defence Force officials who briefed me en route on the plane, and it was about visiting the troops. We repeated the visit down to Katapo on another day, but I went back down with a number of MPs, including a National Party MP. And that was to give them the opportunity to visit the troops.
Okay, sorry, I think we're conflating two different experiences here. When you went back down with the National Party MP, they weren't being collected from Masterton, were they?
Well, it was easier for the Air Force to pick me up from there on the way.
Was it? I don't think easier. Let's be careful with that word. Why was it easier for the Air Force? Where was the B200 coming from?
I think that was from Ohakea.
Right, so you have to fly over the Tararuas, don't you, to get from Ohakea to the Wairarapa?
You've got to fly over Wellington to get to Woodburn, yes, as well.
Okay, so it's not a direct line. What you're saying is the Defence Force didn't mind doing it. Is that what you're saying?
No, the recommendation was to pick you up at Masterton, so it's easier and drop you back at Masterton.
Whose recommendation?
Which is not my home. I live in Cardiff.
So did you approach them and say, how about a lift? Could you swing by in the B200 and drop me back in the NH90? Or did they come to you and say, hey, Minister, why don't we pick you up on the way through?
Look, this is an attack on not just me, John. It's on the Air Force as well. The Air Force make recommendations as what's easiest for them to do. And I take their recommendations on that basis. So there we go.
What's easiest for them to do? Look, it may be that the Defence Force absolutely like doing this. I mean, they have to keep these planes in the air. There are pilots who have to keep hours up. This is a Defence Force that looks for work wherever it can find it. But having said that, you are the Minister. Masterton is not directly between Ohakea and Woodburn. It's not a big deviation, admittedly, but it's not directly on the way.
Well,
is it appropriate they collected you on the way through?
Navigator, John, and there have been a number of occasions where, nor you, but a number of occasions where we have declined opportunities to be picked up, and we have done the route where we drove down to Wellington and we joined an aircraft along with other MPs and we took the flight out of Rongotai. So, we made those decisions based on perceptions, and that's it. So 7 flights thus far in 5 months, 2 to Antarctica. There are no commercial flights going down there.
No, absolutely.
One
to the Chatham Islands for the funeral of Alfred.
One flight, but the guts of this press release that you're pursuing is that Ron Mark is using Defence Force assets as a personal taxi to take them from his home willy-nilly all over the country, and that's what this is about. Now, I am thoroughly disappointed with Mark Mitchell, whom I thought actually was a friend of the Defence Force. And I'd only say this to Mark, if he had paid as much attention to the Anzac frigate project that he allowed to blow out $143 million and left it for me to tie up, we'd be in a better position. If he had made a decision around the P3 instead of kicking the can down the road and leaving it to this government to sort out, he would have been doing his job.
So are you saying it's not? Are you saying it's not legitimate for the opposition defence spokesperson to inquire about the very finite resources that the New Zealand Defence Force has being allocated to collect ejecting a minister from his somewhat out-of-the-way hometown?
Well, I don't think you're portraying that correctly, John. But
well, what's incorrect about that?
Let me say this.
Look, sorry, forgive me. I just want to say I don't have an axe to grind here. I just want to know whether this was appropriate. So I'm not taking any sides. Mark Mitchell has raised the issue. He's used the word repeatedly. And it looks like it happened on 2 dates. Whether or not that is repeatedly is a discussion that maybe they can have on the panel tomorrow. But I am really interested in whether or not you think this was an appropriate deployment of Defence Force resources.
I think that every flight I've taken has been justified by the Air Force and recommendations that I've accepted. I think that all the ones that I have taken, commercial flights, have been appropriate. I think that we're very conscious of the flights of the constraints on Defence Force, and I am not using Air Force assets as some would imply as a personal taxi. I think it's quite scurrilous. It's never been a plane.
It's not me. I'm sorry to quote from Hamlet, and forgive me for confusing the gender, but me thinks the lady doth protest too much.
No, John. I do take offence.
Well, who are you taking offence at?
Well, Mr. Mitchell, and I'll take this point from you, John. I think I could probably run a ruler across every cabinet minister's use of Air Force assets in the last 9 to 10 years, and check to see if what I have done is out of check the benchmarks, see if my let's take that ruler. And once again, this is an exploratory interview. Let's take that ruler, and you, as somebody who knows this portfolio really well and has, I think, a strong commitment to it, cite me another example of a defence minister being collected from home. I have never been collected from my home.
You've been collected from Masterton, and there is no other reason for the Defence Force to land there other than to pick you up and drop you off.
The record that we have sent you says that I was picked up from Masterton, because in the view of those people and the officers who were accompanying me, that was an easy fit. One flight from Masterton down to Woodburn to view exercise Katapo, transfer into NH90s to get around the exercise field, land on Canterbury, visit the crew, talk to the skipper, take off from Canterbury and drop me back into Masterton. Now, that's it. That's the best.
Can we look at 9th of December? Masterton morning departure to Waihuru, and then returning to Masterton later in the day. Now that's a rather lovely drive over Vinegar Hill. I'm very fond of that part of the Central North Island.
Regularly.
So why didn't you do it that time? Where did that helicopter come from? The NH90, which is a big old grunting helicopter that does really important relief work in the Pacific. Where did it come from to collect you?
Well, I think that came out of Ahakia that day.
So it flew over the Tararuas, collected you, went back over the Tararuas to Waihuru, came back over the Tararuas to Masterton, and then went back over the Tararuas to Ohakia.
Yes, that's my understanding.
And given that money is tight, is that, and I really want to listen to your answer, is that an appropriate use of Defence Force resources relative to you sitting in a Crown car and listening to national radio and enjoying the drive over Vinegar Hill?
Well, that is what the Air Force recommended for ease for them as well. The Army recommended that, and I took that opportunity to save a very long drive, and whether that fitted in with pilot training hours or whatever, that's a recommendation they make, and that's the decision we took. Going up to be the reviewing officer for the officer cadet graduation, and getting back home in time for my other appointments was an opportunity.
Ron Mark, Defence Minister, who joined us with very little notice. In fact, we only received the statement from Mark Mitchell at 4:21 this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. We'd love your feedback on this. Text us 2101. I suspect the opinions might be strongly polarised, but we really want to hear what you think. Defence Force Minister Ron Mark, it does look like the Minister was flown in and out of Masterton on 2 dates, October 29th and December 9th. Hundreds of Victoria University students and members of the public marched through Wellington today calling for the government to suspend its contracts with controversial law firm Russell McVeigh. The firm, which provides legal services to the government, is in the spotlight over serious allegations of sexual misconduct levelled at two senior lawyers at its Wellington office 2 years ago, and separate revelations of alcohol-fuelled sex in a boardroom. Katie Scotch was there as the protesters made their way down one of the capital's busiest streets, where lawyers met them demanding change. And now.
Students dressed in black and waving banners chanted as they marched to Russell McVeigh's Wellington office. They were protesting against sexual harassment and violence towards students, interns and graduates in the legal profession, which law student Bethany Patterson says has been going on for far too long.
You hear about these kind of things all the time at law school, and I think there's been a lot of tension bubbling under the surface that people have wanted to speak up about it, but until something comes to the public, you can't talk about it if it's not your story, and you want to respect the rights of those victims. And I feel like now we have an opportunity to say that we want the culture to change.
Outside the firm's office, university student leaders read a list of harassment examples and asked protesters to yell "Me Too" if they had experienced such harassment.
Have you ever been asked way too personal questions about your sex life? Me too! Been told that, oh, that's just how he is when you mention someone's inappropriate behaviour? Me too!
Victoria University student leaders presented a list of demands, including calling for the government to suspend all Russell McVeigh's public contracts until their external review is completed, and for all legal firms to improve the way they deal with sexual assault and harassment. Former lawyer and City Councillor Fleur Fitzsimon supports the calls.
The to-do list has clear objectives that law firms and others can take to eliminate sexual harm and sexual violence in our community. That is possible. Every aspect of sexual harassment and sexual violence is preventable, and we can achieve this, and we have to achieve this.
In the past month, all 6 of the country's law schools have cut ties with Russell McVeigh, a point Victoria University's Vice-Chancellor Grant Guilford reiterated before the march. He says the march clearly shows the university won't stand for sexual harassment.
People are abusing their power, they're not taking responsibility, they're not showing empathy and compassion for the victims of these assaults. And I think they also underestimate it, the impact it has, just sort of marginalise it as some sort of innocent behaviour when in fact it's very, very damaging. So we've got to get out there, we've got to make the statement that it matters, and getting out in the street's one way of doing that.
Earlier today, Women on Boards, a group promoting diversity in boardrooms, cancelled the firm's sponsorship of a major prize giving. Russell McVeigh's management said it won't be commenting until its external review is completed. For Checkpoint, call Katie Scotch Tene.
Bogus breath testing checkpoint, which targeted a group of euthanasia supporters, has been ruled unlawful and unjustified by the police watchdog. Many of you will remember this. Of course, the checkpoint was part of a police investigation into a possible suicide in 2016. And officers were seeking evidence to support prosecuting euthanasia advocate Susie Austin for assisting with that. The Privacy Commissioner has also condemned the action, saying he's concerned police have said they've run similar checkpoints in the past to gather intelligence. Here's our reporter Anne-Marie May.
The police bugged Susie Austin's home in Lower Hutt and listened to matters discussed at the Exit International meeting as part of their investigation into the death of Anne-Marie Treadwell. The conversation at the meeting included how to obtain drugs from overseas and ways for people to take their own lives. That prompted the police to set up a checkpoint down the road where they stopped about 50 vehicles and took the details of those who'd been at the meeting. The police later visited those people, citing concerns about their welfare. Many were dismayed at the visits, with one woman asking Independent Police Conduct Authority investigators why at 85 she was assumed to be helpless and weak and needing comforting police to come and pat her on the back. However, the authority's chairman, Judge Colin Doherty, says there was no evidence to suggest the checkpoint was part of a plan to target Susie Austin herself.
Police were well motivated and concerned for those people that they were dealing with at the time. We didn't find that there was any ulterior motive for collecting and using the information the way they did, other than to be concerned about the welfare of the individuals.
The police accept the watchdog's finding, but Assistant Commissioner Bill Searle says the officers involved were concerned the Exit International meeting attendees were at increased risk of harming themselves. He's apologised for any distress the visits caused.
If people were uncomfortable from the visits and felt bad about them, I'm sorry about that. But as a police officer, you've got to make decisions at short notice. We have a duty to protect life, and the police officers were doing that in a way that they thought was most appropriate at the time.
The Privacy Commissioner John Edwards also investigated the bogus traffic checkpoint and has found the police's collection of information breached people's privacy. The police told the IPCA that similar checkpoints had been used in the past for intelligence gathering, and Mr Edwards says he would be very concerned if that was true.
It's quite clear that police have the authority to stop people and gather their information only in specified circumstances. Abusing that legal authority given to them should not be sanctioned, and I hope that police amend their practices to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future.
Back in Lower Hutt, Susie Austin, who was last month cleared of involvement in the suicide of Anne-Marie Treadwell, feels vindicated by today's IPCA report.
Obviously, I'm very pleased to learn that the Independent Police Conduct Authority found that the checkpoint was totally unlawful. People who were leaving my home after a legal meeting were stopped, and it was found to be unlawful, and that was good, very good.
Susie Austin will be sentenced in May on the 2 charges of importing a suicide drug. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Lots of feedback coming in on Ron Mark, much of it in support of him getting a lift in a helicopter. This from Judith Tizard, who of course was a Labour MP for many years. Where did 4 ministers of defence live, and were aircraft sent to airports near them to pick them up? I think it's a good idea that the Air Force gets practice at visiting regional airports in case they need to in emergencies, and VIP cars cost and ministers' time too. The hours are expected to work a huge. Be fair, he is doing his job, says Judith Tizard, echoing the comments that many of you are making. Thank you. Britain has expelled 23 Russian diplomats in retaliation for the military-grade nerve agent attack on a former Russia double agent and his daughter. After promising to take action if Russia did not respond to a please explain over how the agent came to be used to poison Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, the British Prime Minister Theresa May delivered on that promise today. Ms May said the biggest expulsions from London in 30 years would degrade Russian intelligence capabilities in Britain for years to come. Bridget Burke reports.
So, Mr Speaker, there is no alternative conclusion other than that the Russian state was culpable for the attempted murder of Mr Skripal and his daughter, and for threatening the lives of other British citizens in Salisbury, including Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey.
British Prime Minister Theresa May announcing the expulsion of 23 Russian diplomats in retaliation for a nerve agent attack on former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia on British soil.
They have just 1 week to leave. This will be the single biggest expulsion for over 30 years, and it reflects the fact that this is not the first time that the Russian state has acted against our country. Through these expulsions, we will fundamentally degrade Russian intelligence capability in the UK for years to come.
Mrs May identified the Russian diplomats as undeclared intelligence officers and told Parliament Russia had given her no credible explanation for how the agent came to be used in the United Kingdom.
No explanation as to how this agent came to be used in the United Kingdom. No explanation as to why Russia has an undeclared chemical weapons programme in contravention of international law. Instead, they have treated the use of a military-grade nerve agent in Europe with sarcasm, contempt and defiance.
Mrs May said Russian assets would be frozen, high-level bilateral communications with Moscow would be suspended, and no British minister or member of the royal family would attend the Football World Cup in Russia later this year.
This was not just an act of attempted murder in Salisbury, nor just an act against the UK. It is an affront to the prohibition on the use of chemical weapons, and it is an affront to the rules-based system on which we and our international partners depend. We will work with our allies and partners to confront such actions wherever they threaten our security at home and abroad.
Whilst Germany and France have expressed solidarity with Britain, Russia has dismissed all suggestions that it is responsible and called British accusations a political performance.
Из этого заявление о наличии неопровержимых данных
The Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, demanded material proof be provided of the nerve agent. He said Russia did not speak to the language of ultimatums. Former KGB agent Alexander Litvinenko was murdered with the rare radioactive isotope polonium in London in 1996. 4 diplomats were expelled at the time, and a public inquiry in 2016 concluded he was murdered in an operation most likely ordered by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Today, his widow Maria said Britain's response this time did not go far enough.
You don't need to play with the same rules with Putin, because you never win. But you don't need to show you are soft and you are accepted everything what happened in your country.
66-year-old Sergei Skripal and his 33-year-old daughter Yulia were found unconscious on a bench in Salisbury on March 4th. They remain in a critical condition in hospital. A British policeman who was one of the first to attend the stricken spy was also affected by the nerve agent. Nick Bailey is now conscious but remains in a serious condition in hospital. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Now, the Foreign Minister says he's had no indication from the EU that New Zealand's pursuit of a free trade deal with Russia would hinder ongoing FTA negotiations with the world's biggest trading entity. Mr Peters has been responding to accusations from the National Party. He's an apologist for Russia, saying New Zealand is not putting a deal with Russia above any other agreement. National also says New Zealand's focus on Russia could compromise a major deal with the EU. Trying to make sense of all of this is our political editor, Jane Patterson.
New Zealand's free trade talks with Russia were suspended in 2014 following its military intervention in Ukraine. However, this government has resumed discussions about a deal, as stated in the coalition agreement between Labour and New Zealand First. National's Todd McClay says that raises questions about New Zealand's foreign policy.
There is a lot of concern that, Russia and a free trade agreement is being put ahead of all other trade agreements. The government may deny that, but it's in their coalition agreement, and I'm just not sure why it's there.
New Zealand started formal talks towards a free trade deal with the European Union in 2015 and is hoping to strike a quick deal with the UK once it leaves the EU. Britain's High Commissioner to New Zealand, Laura Clark, was asked whether pursuing a free trade deal with Russia would compromise either of the other deals.
Who New Zealand does free trade agreements is a matter for New Zealand. But of course, these discussions between the EU and New Zealand, discussions between the UK and New Zealand, they never have it happen in a vacuum. A whole range of different factors are always discussed.
This week, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said there should be a level playing field as other European countries are doing significant trade with Russia despite sanctions being in place. But she said a deal with the EU remained a priority.
And there is good reason for that. We're seeking a mandate this year to proceed with that negotiation and are very hopeful about that. Now, the reason for that being a priority is obvious. The scale of that FTA is significant.
Winston Peters was asked if he has had any indication from the European Union a deal with Russia would compromise the ongoing talks with the EU.
No, I can say I have not, and I would not expect them to make a comment like that. I know that we'll be taking up conversations with them in a matter of weeks, actually, to be honest.
Mr Peters says there was a conversation of some length with the Russian Foreign Ministry about a trade deal at the East Asia Summit in the Philippines last November.
But the point is, the issue at the moment is somewhat complicated by events, clearly in Salisbury, in the UK. However, other past events saw the conversations continuing, and so I don't, at this point in time, see it as our number one priority.
But Mr Peters says more broadly New Zealand has trade deals with a number of countries whose record on human rights and the rule of law has been less than satisfactory.
But we've had trade nevertheless, and if we didn't, our people in New Zealand would be starving.
Mr Peters says it's too early to make any definitive statement about how the poisoning of a former Russian spy and his daughter in Salisbury may affect the relationship between New Zealand and Russia and any trade talks. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
you are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Support overwhelmingly for Ron Mark riding in the chopper. We appreciate your texts. Giles next with business. But first, Katrina with the 5:30 headlines.
The National Party says the Defence Minister Ron Mark is using the Air Force like a taxi service. It says Mr Mark has had aircraft collect him from his hometown of Masterton for military events. He says none of the flights were for personal use. The minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission has promised a culture change. In what was described as an emotional meeting today, Christchurch claimants were promised individual case managers to speed up outstanding claims. Talks between the Littleton Port Company and the Rail and Maritime Transport Union have failed yet again. Pay and safety are the main sticking points. The Privacy Commissioner has criticised a bogus police traffic checkpoint which targeted euthanasia supporters. John Edwards says checkpoints are for road safety, not intelligence gathering. Hundreds of Victoria University students have marched through Wellington calling for the law firm at the centre of sexual misconduct allegations to be suspended from working for the government. Russell McVeigh is in the spotlight over allegations against two senior lawyers, as well as revelations of alcohol-fuelled sex in a boardroom. The Russian ambassador to the United Nations has slammed Britain and the US over accusations Moscow is behind a nerve agent attack on a former Russian spy and his daughter in Salisbury. At an emergency session of the UN Security Council, the US ambassador Nikki Haley directly pointed the finger at Russia for the first time. In the England, rugby coach Eddie Jones has been left embarrassed after footage emerged of him referring to Ireland as the scummy Irish and also belittling Wales. The video of Jones giving a talk on leadership last year has only come to light ahead of this weekend's final round of the Six Nations when England host Ireland at Twickenham. Those are the headlines. Back at 6.
It'll be a cracker, that game. Thanks, Katrina. Let's go to business news now with our business editor, Giles Beckford. Hi, Giles. Numbers out today show the economy's sort of quietly trundling along, really.
Indeed. Good evening to you, John. Gross domestic product is the name of the numbers. It's the measure of the economy. It shows that we're actually not too many surprises there. As you would have expected, the wet weather and then the hot and dry weather that we had towards the end of last year, that hurt agriculture and therefore production was down in that particular sector. But the domestic side and the services side of the economy doing quite nicely. Retail spending, building, any industries that are exposed to tourism, they're all humming along quite nicely. So the growth rate for the quarter for the 3 months was 0.6%, and for the year it was 2.9%. Now, just by way of comparison, a year ago the growth rate was the annual growth rate was 4%. So there is a clear slowdown that's occurred there, but it's expected to pick up this year. We might just say that there's a little sting in the tail, which is when you slice the economy, which is worth around $280 billion. When you slice it by head of population for all 4.79 million of us, it comes out at around $51,000 each. That's our slice of the pie. That rose about $800 on the year, so about 0.1, 0.2%. Nothing too great to write home about. That's an effect of migration there, clearly.
Thanks, Giles. The risk of cyber threats, a growing risk according to the country's CEOs, right? It's worrying them?
Well, this is a survey of chief executives. It's a global survey, but when you slice the New Zealand results out of it, somewhat surprising that the chief executives in this country, I should say the survey is done by PwC, but when you take their big worry in New Zealand, cyber attacks is the big one, and I wonder about that one. It ranks ahead of trying to find the right skilled people for the business. It also outranks concerns about rules and regulations. But the other one that features at the bottom of the, should we say, the top worries is terrorism. Now, neither cyber attacks nor terrorism, you have to say, really features as a big business risk in this part of the world. And I wonder whether the chief executives are perhaps a little bit distracted. One can say that their view of the world economy a bit pessimistic. Only about a third of them think things will get better globally, but they're very upbeat about their own business prospects. 9 out of 10 think that they're going to go well this year, in fact, do better this year. So a mixed survey. Like all things, I think, surveys, you take out of it what you want.
Thanks, Giles. What did the markets do today?
We can say top 50 index and shares, they were up 35 points, so back on the growth path, 8467, so about 30 points shy of the record. The New Zealand dollar took a wee bit of a tumble after the growth numbers. They were a bit softer than expected, and people are figuring that the Reserve Bank won't be raising rates anytime soon. So we fell down to about 73, but rebounded back to 73.2 US cents at the moment, and just touching 93 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you. There are normally calls of pork barrel politics and snouts in the trough at Parliament, but today a real snout turned up. The pig accompanied a petition signed by more than 100,000 people, which demanded a ban on the use of farrowing crates. Our deputy political editor, Chris Bramwell, was there.
Princess Buttercup is a 6-month-old kunikuni pig who has a pretty sweet life. She trundled along to Parliament today to represent her less fortunate porcine cousins. According to the animal advocacy group SAFE, there are about 15,000 sows confined to farrowing crates at any one time. The group spokesperson, Mandy Carter, says the pigs who give birth and nurse their babies in the crates are unable to turn around for weeks on end.
So in a farrowing crate, they are placed into them about 5 days before they give birth and for up to 4 to 5 weeks afterwards. It is a life of despair and a life of distress. They can't even turn around, and when you say that out loud, it just sounds the most ridiculous thing, to put animals in a position where they can't even turn around. It is really an awful way to treat them.
Ms Carter says pigs are highly intelligent and much smarter than dogs, which people would never treat this way.
It actually breaks our Animal Welfare Act, which says that animals should be able to express their natural behaviour. I think we'd all agree it's quite a natural behaviour to be able to turn around and to have bedding and to have the things that we need. And they aren't given this right now in factory farms. So that's why we feel it's urgent that these practices are banned.
The 110,000 signature petition was handed to the Green Party MP Gareth Hughes. He's hopeful Parliament can work towards a ban on the crates.
The petition size means that the Select Committee must give it a proper due process, must hear from experts, from scientists, from the animal welfare groups. Look, I think it's a pretty compelling case that it's got to be banned. The solutions are there, and that's what I'll be urging the Minister, Meka Whaitiri.
Do you eat bacon?
I don't eat bacon personally, but I don't judge those who do.
The Pork Industry Board says the crates have been approved by the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee and are actually better for the piglets and the sows. Its chairperson, Ian Carter, says it allows them to stay warm and dry, and the sows will not squash the piglets, as can happen if they were in a bigger space.
We've created an environment very similar to a maternity hospital with those aspects, but we recognise that by having a level of restriction of movement gives the greatest opportunity for her progeny to survive, and that's proven by the results.
Ian Carter says the industry would like to think that the government would base its decisions on science and what's actually good for the animals, not on the emotion of a lobby group.
This is why the previous government had NAWAC do a review of our systems only 2 years ago, and that group of people that were empowered to came out with the outcome that the system still provides the best overall welfare for the piglets and the sow.
About a third of New Zealand producers don't use farrowing crates, but fewer piglets survive. A te witi wharipari mata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
The EQC Minister is signalling legislative change may be needed to deal with Canterbury homeowners who purchased houses post-quake believing the homes had been fully repaired and in fact being told by EQC documents they had been. Megan Woods says she's spoken to Justice Minister Andrew Little about allocating pre-budget funding so test cases could go to court to fast-track legal clarification on the unsold situation where homeowners have found themselves out of pocket and uninsured. It comes as one of those homeowners warns buyers to stay away from any house that has had a repair managed by the Earthquake Commissioner. Tanya Ashton is a solo mum with 2 teenage boys who has recently discovered the home she thought had been properly repaired by EQC in fact needs repairs costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Conan Young and cameraman Richard Tindler visited Tanya and 2 other families who found out their biggest asset is in fact their biggest liability.
Tired of living in a small unit with her 2 growing teenage sons, in 2015 Tanya Ashton started looking for something bigger.
I put my house on the market in Queen's Park and that night it was sold, and we went around and we were the choice of this one and another house, and this one won because it had a staircase to a second floor.
And that was something the boys...
They always wanted a 2-storey house.
A year later, and there was a knock on the door from EQC wanting to check the repairs it had carried out before she bought the home were up to scratch. They weren't, and this family spent 6 weeks living in a motel while their dream home had a second set of repairs done.
It was horrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, the motel was lovely, but living out of a suitcase, you can't take everything, and just, you know, we just shifted in here. We didn't want to have to shift out. So, yeah, it was pretty horrible. Cooking on a 2-burner stove top, microwave meals, because you've still got to pay your mortgage when you're not here.
Fast forward another year and yet another inspection by EQC, which discovers that after 2 attempts to fix the home, its contracted builders had failed to re-level the home and substantial repairs would be required on its foundations to stop it leaning dramatically to one side. This sent her over EQC's $100,000 cap, the maximum amount it pays out for earthquake damage.
I was absolutely petrified and in tears because I bought this house, I had insurance, I've been paying my insurance all my life, and now it's gone over cap. But why has it gone over cap? If the repairs had been done properly the first time, it would be fine. But yeah, so they're going to, you know, they got 2 lots of money out of it for dodging it up. I don't know what you'd call it.
For a claimant who owned their home at the time of the earthquakes, going over EQC's cap would mean being handed on to their insurer, which would then settle the balance of the claim. They would either be given a new home, have the necessary repairs carried out, or be given a payout. But for people like Tanya, who bought their home off the original claimant, this sort of cover doesn't apply. It's up to her to find the hundreds of thousands of dollars required to get the work done.
I'd like the houses to be fixed to the level they should have been. If there's dodgy workmanship, those people should be held accountable. The people that didn't do the job properly, they should be held accountable because they've taken money out of my pocket and my children's pocket and made our life a living hell.
And what sort of level of oversight do you think there was from Fletcher EQR and from EQC on the repair that they had actually asked to have completed?
I don't even know if any of them were qualified, to tell you the truth. They used standover tactics. They, for example, the patio out there that was paid to be removed and reinstated, it's still there. The tongue and groove flooring that they removed to fix the subfloor was charged, as if they'd put it back. It hasn't been put back.
The impact of living in a quake-damaged home has been huge.
You try not to think about it, but it does get you down. My kids hate this place. Absolutely petrified of this house. But I can't do anything about it. If there's an earthquake, they sleep downstairs with me. And these are grown boys, 13 and 16, are petrified.
It's moving around quite a bit, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Especially up in the upstairs corner where my eldest son is. And yeah, it does scare you. Yeah. You always think, is the top going to fall down on the bottom?
Tanya has this advice for anybody looking at buying a home in post-earthquake Christchurch.
Get a qualified opinion and investigate something chronic. Just make sure. And actually don't even buy one that's been fixed. Yeah. It's too much. Yeah. You don't want to go down this track. Could be 6 years down the road and you'll find out that there's something wrong. And then you'll have a bill.
Tanya Ashton's story is bad enough, but what's becoming increasingly clear in Christchurch is that her case could be just the tip of the iceberg, and that thousands of people could have bought houses since the earthquakes that have had botched repairs or where damage has been missed completely. Debbie Momo and her husband are both in their 50s and purchased their home with an eye to doing it up and selling it as a way to put aside some money for when they retired.
So we knew that when we were buying it, the repairs had never been done and that there was only meant to be $25,000 worth of damage to the house. Cosmetic damage, they said. And that was visible to us. but it didn't really worry me because we've got builder friends, and yeah, little cracks can be plastered up and, you know, and painted, and we thought, well, EQC had done their job and said it was only facial, cosmetic, so we felt quite safe.
It was only when they began their restorations and lifted the old carpet, noticing a large crack in the concrete floor, that they realised the damage was anything but cosmetic. A proper assessment by a builder revealed their worst fears.
He pretty much, it didn't take him very long at all to work out that this house should have come down. Really, it was pretty bad.
So it went from being $20,000 worth of cosmetic repairs to what?
A write-off, an absolute write-off, and I cried. I didn't really understand what it all meant. I just was so shocked, really. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? Because we're not 21 anymore. This was our future, and this, you know. So, yeah, it was a really hard thing to find out.
An inspection by EQC uncovered what many homeowners in this city have been finding out, that EQC had initially classed the house as a write-off, but subsequently downgraded their assessment and decided there were only minor repairs needed. Just like Tanya Ashton, she was sent over the $100,000 cap, but then found her private insurer would not pick up the tab for any of the substantial foundation repairs she was now facing, costing hundreds of thousands more to complete.
I got talking to a lady there called Barbara for quite a while. We'd have a few phone calls every couple of weeks, and she'd say things to me like, oh, I'm working for you, I hate the situation that you're in, I'm doing everything I can for you. And one day she phoned and she said, would it be okay if I came to visit you with one of my colleagues? And I said, sure. So the three of us sat at this table, and they basically just said that they felt really sad for the situation that I was in, but in no way was it anything to do with EQC, no sorry or anything for the fact that they got it wrong, nothing, just that without being able to find the insurer at the time and following up a claim, we were stuck, and this would be it for us. So again, that day they left, I had another cry thinking this cannot be the case.
For Mike Stewart, Julia McIntyre and Julia's two children, Sean and Andrea, the damage that was missed by EQC didn't become apparent until they attempted to sell their home.
Well, they asked for the scope of works, which we didn't have. So we went to EQC quickly to try and get a scope of works, and when we got it, they did their engineer's report with the scope of works and went, well, the ring foundation hasn't been replaced. Clearly, it hadn't been replaced. And then when we started looking further, you could see more and more things weren't done.
The sale fell through, and this family began a 2-year-long battle to get EQC to fix what it should have fixed before they bought their home. The only problem was they had already bought their new home, trusting that the old one, that they had spent $50,000 on in renovations, would easily sell. They now owned 2 homes and were in a lot of debt.
We're interest only now, trying to not sell this house. We'll see how that goes.
Julia is keen to hang on to their new house, especially now her children have settled into their new school.
We know the kids of Christchurch have had enough of a shake-up with the quakes and all the different changes going on, and yeah, they need that reliability of a good school and stability of a house to live in, and that's what I really want to give them.
And so you're really just trying to hang on in here as long as you can?
Oh, we certainly are, yeah, so I can't quite see how it's going to happen now.
Julia wants to see EQC own the problem of failed repairs instead of sending people like her over cap and into the limbo land faced by this new category of homeowner, the on-solds.
What we really need is for some judgment to be made and for them to front up and deal with all the houses that may have these issues.
So you don't think you guys are an unusual case?
Definitely not. I think that this is largely still a hidden problem, and a lot of people won't want to watch the news about it or read the papers about it, and maybe deep down they have a feeling that they should get their house checked. And I say 100% please get your house checked.
All of those spoken to for this piece are part of a group court action being worked on that would see EQC sued for failing to fulfil its obligations. Just how many more people are in the same situation as them has yet to be seen. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang Tēnei.
Now, the EQC Minister, Megan Wood, says the law might need to be changed to deal with on-sold situations so homeowners like the ones we've just met in Conan's story aren't left out of pocket.
What we have seen is a number of cases that have come through that have been in the media where people have had a really terrible experience, that they've bought a house, they think they've done everything right, and they're left in a situation where no one seems to be liable for very expensive repairs. We need to clarify the law in that area, and that's exactly why the government's moving really swiftly on work around how it is that we can do test cases to clarify those areas of law. Absolutely. I mean, if it comes through that the law's not working and that it's not serving people well, then we'll need to look at legislative change.
It's the Minister, Megan Wood, speaking in Christchurch earlier. Minginui is the tiny Bay of Plenty village the world forgot until today. Regional Development Minister Shane Jones has announced a $5.8 million boost to the Minginui nursery from the government's $1 billion a year Provincial Growth Fund. Local iwi Ngāti Whare runs the nursery, which will be expanded to produce 1 million native seedlings a year and help drive local employment. But will the nursery's expansion be enough to help the community overcome the economic and social hardships it's battled over the years? Te Mana Korehi reporter John Boynton has more.
Cradled in the Whirinaki Forest Park, which backs on to the Urewera Ranges, Minginui was left to fall by the wayside after the local sawmill closed in the 1980s. An hour and a half's drive to Rotorua or Whakatane, or 30 kilometres from Murupara, the tiny village has largely been forgotten. Local Veoruri says the community is still feeling the impact of the sawmill closure to this day.
When employment left, everyone was shocked. No one knew what was going to happen tomorrow. Everyone was shocked and they stayed like that for 20 years.
Veoruri moved back home to Minginui in 2003 from Auckland and says the transition was a struggle. The derelict state of housing, poor living conditions and high unemployment, Veoruri says, makes life tough in the village.
When we came back, it was really hard because the unemployment level was really low and people's morale was real low.
But she is slowly starting to see positive changes, and the expansion of the nursery, she says, is a major boost.
Everyone's hopeful now because things are getting done. You know, before we got told a lot of things, but nothing got done. But now we see it. We see things happening.
The Minginui nursery currently employs 9 staff members and is expected to increase tenfold with its expansion. Rick Braddock is chairman of the Ngāti Whare Group Holdings. He says the funds will be used to upskill locals and provide better social outcomes for the community.
We're going to recreate business by actually growing and planting Indigenous trees. And we think there's a very strong opportunity for Indigenous forestry on a commercial basis.
The native trees will be used in the government's plan to plant 1 billion natives over the next 10 years. The iwi has invested almost $2 million into the nursery, which uses leading-edge propagation and nursery technology. Rick Braddock believes the expansion of the nursery will bring the village back to life.
The houses are privately owned there. They're in poor condition. As people are able to earn more, they'll be able to afford to do those houses up. Likewise, as more and more people come back into the village, local stores and bakeries and cafes and shops will reopen again.
The village population has dwindled to 300 people, and Shane Jones is well aware of the economic hardships the community has faced over the years.
They are in a bleak area. It's an area that the mainstream flow of economic activity has long since passed by.
Shane Jones is not promising the investment in the nursery will solve the village's issues, but he says it's a start.
What will flow is an output of at least 1 million native trees, the absorption of scores and scores of their young people into an enterprise that's scientifically proven.
He's impressed by how the iwi has used its modest treaty settlement and resources.
In a benighted area, this is an example of what other tribes may want to do to work in partnership with the government.
A portion of the $5.8 million worth of funding will also go towards covering the cost to bring the cell phone service to Minginui village. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
Lots of feedback tonight with the time about a minute and a half before the news at 6. I have no objection to this travel journey with the RNZAF. They need all the air and airport experience they can get, says Kay Stokes from Auckland. Lots of people saying that. This one, just looked at a map, it's kind of on the way, seems efficient to me, better than Air New Zealand flying me to Christchurch on the way from Nelson to Palmy, says Paul. Susan says, thank you, John. You reminded him as we're watching and noticing. It's disappointing to hear Labour Party ministers wriggling away from being open and honest, just as National used to do. Why couldn't he say, actually, you're right, I should have driven instead of using an expensive aircraft? I'd be sure not to do that again. That from Susan in Auckland Central. A really polarised feedback, although the majority of people supporting Ron Mark and his right to accept a lift from the Air Force as they are sweeping from Ohakia down to Woodburn. Kate on Winston Peters. If Winston Peters is an apologist for the Russians, that makes Todd McClay an apologist for Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. I remember him going there and being delighted that he was setting up a free trade deal as Saudi was brutally bombing the people of Yemen and then leaving them to starve. Thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate hearing from you. And lots of it tonight. It's coming up to the news at 6 with Katrina.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The Defence Minister Ron Mark is denying any inappropriate use of military aircraft after revelations he's used them to fly to and from home. Mr Mark has this afternoon released a list of all his trips after the National Party accused him of using the Air Force as a taxi service. Here's our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell.
In October, Ron Mark caught a flight in an Air Force turboprop plane from Masterton to Woodburn Air Base to watch a military exercise. He returned that afternoon. Mr Mark lives in Carterton, a roughly 15-minute drive from Masterton. Again in December, he flew to and from Waioru Camp in a helicopter to review a graduation parade. Ron Mark says the flights were taking him to official engagements and were not for personal use. He says as Defence Minister, he's acutely aware of perception when taking NZDF flights. Atuiti whare pārimata ko Chris Bramwell aho.
The Foreign Minister denies the claim New Zealand's pursuit of a free trade deal with Russia could compromise negotiations with the European Union. New Zealand's free trade talks with Moscow were suspended in 2014 following its military intervention in Ukraine. The National Party questions why New Zealand would restart talks when sanctions are still in place. Mr Peters says other European countries are doing booming trades with Russia and there should be a level playing field. And he says he's had no indication from the EU that talks with Russia would pose any problem.
No, I can say I have not, and I would not expect them to make a comment like that. I know that we'll be taking up conversations with them in a matter of weeks, actually, to be honest.
Winston Peters says it's too early to make any definitive statement on how the nerve gas attack in the UK may affect the relationship between New Zealand and Russia and any trade talks. The minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission has met with Christchurch claimants and promised a culture change is on the cards at EQC. In what was described as an emotional meeting, the group was promised individual case managers for the 2,500 people with outstanding claims to speed up the process. Many have purchased homes with undisclosed damage and then found their private insurer is unwilling to provide cover, leaving them hugely out of pocket. Megan Woods says a law change may be required to help the group. For now, she says the current law needs clarifying, which is why the government is paying for a declaratory judgment from the High Court. The privacy watchdog has joined the Independent Police Conduct Authority in criticising a bogus traffic checkpoint run by the police in Lower Hutt, which targeted a group of euthanasia supporters. An IPCA report today has found police acted unlawfully in using the checkpoint in their investigation into a possible suicide, which led to the unsuccessful prosecution of an Exit International member. The Privacy Commissioner John Edwards says checkpoints are allowed under the Land Transport Act for very specific purposes.
And those purposes are about the administration of road safety laws, not about general welfare or crime prevention or investigation.
John Edwards says the collection of personal information was unlawful and unfair and breached the Privacy Act. The government is reviewing the consequences of rising tobacco taxes, including increases in crime and the financial impact on smokers and their families. The evaluation, commissioned by the Ministry of Health, will help determine whether the government continues to hike the tax. Tobacco products increased by 10% in January for the second year in a row and will continue to rise each year until 2020. Smoking rates have declined as the taxes have increased, but there are also growing complaints from dairy owners who say robberies are increasing because of the high prices of cigarettes. Talks between the Lyttelton Port Company and the Rail and Maritime Transport Union have failed yet again after several hours of talks today. Pay and safety are the main sticking points. The union spokesperson John Kerr says the union put forward 8 scenarios that could have led to a settlement, but the port company will not move its position.
I don't think anybody stood. Does anybody want to go on strike? No. I mean, these guys don't want to go out the gate. We just want to get this fixed. This has been hugely difficult. It has been the most acrimonious round of bargaining that I've experienced in 20 years of being a union organiser.
John Kerr says strike action will resume next week. The port's operations manager Paul Monk says the port won't comment on negotiations as both parties agreed on confidentiality. Scientists have found the massive underwater mudslide caused by the 2016 North Canterbury earthquake carved out parts of the Kaikoura sea canyon by up to 50 metres. In a paper published today in the scientific journal Science Advances, NIWA marine geologist Joshua Mountjoy says the quake triggered the flow of more than 100 million truckloads of mud and sand through the canyon. It's 6:05. Sport and the All Blacks and Crusaders midfielder Ryan Crotty has failed to recover from a head knock he suffered in the side's last round loss to the Hurricanes and will miss the Southern Derby against the Highlanders in Dunedin on Saturday night. However, the Crusaders skipper and All Blacks lock, Sam Whitelock, who also suffered a concussion in the match, has recovered and will play. Crotty has been replaced in the starting lineup by Tim Bateman. Barcelona and Bayern Munich have completed the quarter-final lineup for the European Champions League. Lionel Messi scored twice and created another goal as Barcelona thrashed Chelsea 3-0 in the Camp Nou to reach the last 8 4-1 on aggregate. Bayern Munich eased past Besiktas 3-1 in Turkey to go through 8-1. They join Juventus, Liverpool, Manchester City, Real Madrid, AS Roma and Sevilla in tomorrow's quarter-final draw. Tiger Woods is favourite for this week's Arnold Palmer Invitational Golf Tournament in Florida, the first time he's topped the odds in years. Woods tied for second in the Valspar Championship last week, and now, in just his 5th start in his latest comeback, he's favoured to win the Arnold Palmer tournament for the 9th time. It's been 5 years since he last won a major, and the 14-time winner says he still has a lot to do on a course he hasn't played for a while.
Just because I've won here 8 times doesn't mean I'm going to win this week automatically. I still got to do the work. I still got to go through the process of getting myself in position. But I understand this golf course. I've played it under so many different varying conditions. I got to do some serious homework though.
Woods is also one of the favourites for next month's US Masters. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance ventures into the South Island mountains in search of takehe. She also checks out the state of our glaciers. We have a window on the word of iodine and why we can't do without it. And our overseas correspondent Shobha Narayan reports in from India, where journalists and journalism are under attack.
And on Lately at 10, we're live and we'll be keeping you up to date with the world, talking to some of the people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. High cloud, a few showers for Northland. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waidat Upper, fine with variable high cloud. However, a southerly change brings a few showers late tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, including Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihepe. Cloudy periods and isolated showers. Showers more frequent and possibly heavy tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Nelson, mainly fine but 1 or 2 showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain today with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms about Fiordland and Westland. Rain gradually easing to isolated showers tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, high cloud. A few showers develop tomorrow with a southerly change. Otago and Southland, rain developing this evening, turning to showers early tomorrow morning, then easing later and fine spells increasing. And the Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, and thank you everyone for being with us. 14 Christchurch residents still battling EQC 7 years on were today invited to share their stories with Minister Megan Woods and EQC's interim chairwoman, Dame Annette King. EQC is currently handling 2,600 outstanding claims from the Canterbury earthquakes, including 1,300 botched repairs. A further 316 claimants have legal action against EQC before the courts. Dame Annette said the emotional meeting had highlighted a poor collection of data by EQC and signalled a need for a culture change within the organisation. She said outstanding claimants needed realistic timeframes for when their claims would be resolved.
So what we heard today, and although I've heard stories, local MPs in our caucus often stood up and told us stories, it was very powerful to hear them from people today, and they came from people who've had claims that have been outstanding for 7 years, through to those that have bought a house thinking they'd bought a sound house only to find that it's a written-off house. So what I'm expecting and what the Minister's expecting for us to achieve is to ensure that we have a change of culture, and EQC is no doubt. And EQC themselves have said they haven't always handled this well, and a change of culture is needed. And what I have detected in the time that I've been in this job, and I've met with the staff, I met with all the staff this morning in Canterbury, and I've met with the management and some of the staff in Wellington, is a determination to be much more open, transparent and engaged with the claimants in a way they haven't before. And part of the change is for EQC here in Canterbury to ensure every one of those claimants who are still outstanding has a case manager, that they work in case management with them. This pushing from pillar to post, never knowing who you're dealing with multiple organisations and agencies, is to be managed in a case managed way, which they hope will start at the very beginning of April. I think that will help a lot of people in that peace of mind. What's happening? What is the process? There are going to be some long-term issues, which no doubt Christine will report on, that will need to be addressed, and it will end up in the lap of the government, I think, some of these to address what is going to happen with on-sold houses. And so what we're focusing on now is a whole of systems on Canterbury, a setting up of a new Canterbury office here with a focus on Canterbury. And as the Minister said, with people at the heart of it. And I'm determined that what we do going forward is in the best interest of those who have been waiting and needing to have resolution. So it was eye-opening and very moving to hear those cases today.
It's Dame Annette King echoing Sid Miller's response, the CEO of EQC, to homeowners describing their experiences on Checkpoint a couple of weeks ago. Last night on Checkpoint, Zach Fleming looked at the state of beaches in Auckland. Zach found no swim notices on 24 beaches in the city of Sales. That's nearly 40% of all monitored beaches. 16 of them are so long-term they have no end date. Things are better than they were last month. Over a few days in February, 50 beaches were no swim zones. Some of the city's most famous and beloved beaches, including Takapuna and Mission Bay, have been declared elevated health risks due to poor water quality this summer. The city's beaches are so dirty in some places that ocean swimming events are now regularly being cancelled, and surf lifesavers are refusing to work at events at any beaches that aren't officially designated as clean. I spoke to Auckland Mayor Phil Goff just before coming on air. He says the state of Auckland's beaches is simply not good enough.
And that's why I've proposed in our 10-year budget what I'm calling a targeted rate for water quality. It works out at about $1.30 a week per household on the average priced home of $1 million. That'll give us, for example, another $400 million it will assist the work that we're already doing and bring it forward so that over the next decade we can reduce the wastewater overflows onto our beaches, into our streams, by about 80 to 90%.
Okay,
that was going to take 30 years.
Right, so I was just going to say, you're bringing it forward. So from 30 years to 10 years.
Yeah, and of course it's going to take 10 years. Why? Because when you're building something like the Central Interceptor, which is going to cost $1 billion, you're talking about 13 kilometres of tunnel that's got a diameter of about 4.5 metres. It's a massive engineering job, but we're putting that out to tender right now, and we will start construction on that next year. So $1 billion on a Central Interceptor, more than $500 million on a Northern Interceptor over the North Shore, $136 million that we've just spent on upgrading the wastewater treatment plant at Mangere, which I'll be opening within months. All of those things are going to make a real difference. And it's not before time that we're doing these things. It should have happened years ago.
Right, so that's infrastructure you're just describing is with a rates increase of $1.30 a week on the average house.
That's the targeted rate for water quality.
Okay.
It's over and above the 2.5% general rate increase.
And are you seeking feedback on this? In other words, are you asking ratepayers if they want it?
Yep, and we're getting that right now. I've got the results from the first week. The first week we got 2,839 responses, and of those, 66% were in favour and 26 were opposed. So 26% of Aucklanders apparently quite happy about untreated water going into our harbours and onto our beaches, but 2/3 of us want council to do something about it and are prepared to put their money where their mouth is.
And if this doesn't happen, how long will it take before we are not swimming in wastewater, to put it politely?
Well, the truth is the situation with our beaches have been like this for as long as you and I have been alive, John. You'll probably remember the Manukau Harbour in the days when you couldn't swim on any beach in the Manukau, and the stench of the sewage across Mangere and Mount Roskill was appalling. So we've made some real advances, but we've still got a long way to go. And you can tell that because normally there's about 16 beaches that you shouldn't be swimming at. Whenever it rains and the stormwater overflows into the wastewater system, you've got dilute sewage going into the harbours, and you've got the runoff from our roads going into the harbours, and that makes it unsafe to swim in. Why do we know that so well now? Because we've brought in a new system called Safe Swim. The old system was 5% accurate. The new system is over 80% accurate, and we've had a 20,000% increase in the number of people using our Safe Swim website since the start of the year.
Which is fantastic, but it doesn't alter the fact that there's poo in our seawater, right? Right.
Quite deliberately, it makes it apparent to people that that is a problem, and that makes all of us, I hope, more determined to get on and do something about it.
Okay, and if we don't, if we don't agree to the targeted rates increase of about $1.30 a week on the average Auckland property, how long will it take before we're not swimming in poo?
It would take 30 years to get on and do the job that needs to be done. We can do that within a feasible construction time with the money in 10 years. That's what we ought to do, and that's what I urge Aucklanders sending their submissions into council to support.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff talking to us just before we came on air. It's coming up to 17 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. Doctors working overtime to roll out bowel screening are confident a serious problem with keeping track of patients has now been fixed. The government revealed last month that 2,500 eligible Waitemata residents were not invited to be screened for their cancer killer because of a failure with the address register managed by the Health Ministry. That sparked a review, but doctors say the problem's sorted and the rollout must press ahead. Our health correspondent Karen Brown has more.
A bowel screening pilot underway at Waitemata since 2011 has paved the way for long-awaited national screening. But people who were meant to be included in the pilot missed out if they'd moved without leaving a forwarding address. The register should have linked in to patients' unique National Health Index or NHI number so they could be tracked. The DHB warned the ministry about the looming problem for 4 years before there was any action. That's of little comfort to a 72-year-old Whenuapai resident we've agreed to call Dave, who says he's never received an invitation.
I'm a regular user of things like prescriptions, so my NHI number is well known to health authorities. I've been going to a GP in the Waitemata area for about the last 10 years at least, and it's never come up.
The ministry took responsibility for the error, which meant the 2,500 people being dropped from a screening register. Dave remains worried, however, that the problems could be wider.
Well, it just seems to me that it's not just people that have changed addresses, but I would be very surprised if I'm the only one in this situation.
Bowel screening differs from breast and cervical screening, which both leave it up to the individual to seek testing. Instead, people must decline or opt out if they don't want to take part. Canterbury colorectal surgeon Frank Frizzell says unless this is changed, more problems could occur.
The concept that bowel cancer screening is somehow unique and that it has to have a different pathway for being able to go into the system is flawed. And until that's sorted, then I think that this could reoccur again.
Alistair Patrick, head of screening at Counties Manukau DHB, which will begin screening by mid-year, disagrees, saying the present method will ensure higher participation rates. He understands the address problem has been fixed.
We've certainly had very high-level reassurances that it is fixed, and I guess we just take that on board and have to continue to be proactive, to make sure that is the case.
The Minister, David Clark, is yet to announce who will lead an independent review of screening announced last month. The rollout schedule for screening nationwide has already been extended, and the Cancer Society Medical Director Chris Jackson says no further delays are wanted.
It's been 7 years since the pilot started, and New Zealanders are desperate for screening to get ahead. It's such an important program to reduce our world-leading death rates from bowel cancer. So the sooner the screening program gets rolled out around the country, the better for everyone.
The Health Ministry declined to be interviewed whilst its own review of the address debacle continues. Mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Karen Brownaho.
6:20. A number of countries are throwing their support behind Britain over the nerve agent attack in Salisbury last week after promising to take action if Russia did not respond to a please explain over how a Russian-made military-grade nerve agent came to be used to poison Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The British Prime Minister Theresa May made good on that promise today. She's getting support from key allies, but Russia and some of the people texting in are furious and continue to vehemently deny any involvement. Elizabeth Brown has this report.
Theresa May went to Parliament prepared after Russia failed to meet her midnight deadline.
They have treated the use of a military-grade nerve agent in Europe with sarcasm, contempt and defiance. So, Mr. Speaker, there is no alternative conclusion other than that the Russian state was culpable for the attempted murder of Mr. Skripal and his daughter. This represents an unlawful use of force by the Russian state against the United Kingdom.
She then outlined the biggest diplomatic action against Russia since the Cold War.
The United Kingdom will now expel 23 Russian diplomats who have been identified as undeclared intelligence officers. They have just 1 week to leave.
And she didn't stop there. Britain will also look to freeze Russian state assets that pose a security threat, and there will be no British ministers or royalty at this year's World Cup in Russia. Outrage over the attack then moved to New York, where Britain requested a special meeting of the UN Security Council. Its ambassador, John Allen, called for a united response from the international community.
Denial, distraction and threats. It is what Russia does. But we will not let such threats deter us. We will stand firm, confident in our democracy, our rule of law, and the freedom of our people. We will stand by the values which are shared by the overwhelming majority of those in this Council, in this United Nations.
But the words Britain really wanted to hear came from the US Ambassador Nikki Haley, who became the first US official to directly point the finger at Russia.
The United States stands in absolute solidarity with Great Britain. The United States believes that Russia is responsible for the attack on 2 people in the United Kingdom using a military-grade nerve agent. They could be used here in New York or in cities or of any country that sits on this council.
Nikki Haley was followed by a number of other nations, including China, France, Australia, Peru and Ethiopia, voicing similar concerns. All the while, Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, listened stony-faced. When it came to his turn to speak, he categorically denied Moscow's involvement and demanded material proof of the nerve agent. His words are translated.
We do not speak the language of ultimatums. We demand that material proof be provided of the allegedly found Russian trace in this event. Without this, stating that there is incontrovertible truth is not something that we can take into account.
For its part, the Kremlin has described the diplomatic expulsions as unacceptable, unjustified and short-sighted. Maria Zakharova from the Russian Foreign Ministry said it's part of an anti-Russian campaign.
Prime Minister May is destroying international law and is destroying international relationship. Of course, it's the end of her career. It's the end. It's a show. That was a political show. It's not serious. It's not for the serious politician.
So now all eyes are on Russia for the next move in this diplomatic crisis, as it promises retaliatory action of its own. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Brown.
A wave of youth activism swept through the United States today, 1 month after the mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. In a show of unity, students from New York to California marched out of their classrooms and sat in silence for 17 minutes, a minute for each of the 17 victims of the shooting, to demand tighter gun control laws. The students want background checks tightened, loopholes closed and semi-automatic rifles banned. Hundreds of students marched on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where lawmakers have yet to come up with anything even resembling a cohesive plan for reform. CNN's Ryan Nobles was there.
Gun control! When do we want it? Now!
Enough is enough. That was the message from waves of high school students across the country today as they poured out of schools, across football fields, and into the streets to demand action on gun violence. In New York City, Governor Andrew Cuomo participated in a die-in alongside local teens.
How many more? And how many more?
To get the attention of national lawmakers, thousands more students skipped school, taking their message directly to Washington.
We will accept nothing less than comprehensive gun control. Yeah. And if it's what it takes, we will shame our national policymakers into protecting us.
Yeah. This generation of students was born after the 1999 massacre at Columbine.
I think of my little brother and sister and how it could have been them and how it could be them if they don't change the law.
They participate in school shooting drills regularly.
We're starting to realize, wait, why is no one in Washington doing anything? Whether you are on one side of the aisle or the other, all the students want to live.
We want change! We want change!
Despite a unified message from their youngest constituents just outside, senators inside the Capitol continued to question how shootings, such as the one in Parkland, Florida, could have been prevented.
The man did everything but take an ad out in the paper, I'm going to kill somebody. We tell our citizens to, if you see something, say something. Well, doesn't it become incumbent upon us as a society to do something?
The FBI admits it failed to follow up on tips it received about the Parkland shooter prior to the massacre. Today, another admission.
Has anyone been reprimanded? Has anyone been terminated?
As of today, no.
Meanwhile, on the House side,
the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Lawmakers passed a bill designed to fund more security at schools across America, but the bill does nothing to address current gun laws. Students who flooded the National Mall warned that won't be enough to silence them.
Give us concrete solutions, and for once, value our lives over your bank accounts, or we will vote you out.
And while there is no doubt that these students were hoping to send a message to lawmakers at all levels of government, much of their message was directed right at the President of the United States. And Donald Trump never specifically acknowledged the effort of all these students walking out all across the United States. But his spokesperson, Raj Shah, did say that the president shares their concerns about school safety.
That's Ryan Nobles from CNN. Today, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz appeared in a Florida court where a not guilty plea was entered on 17 counts of first-degree murder over the Parkland shooting. The plea was entered on his behalf. He chose to remain silent. Prosecutors have indicated they will seek the death penalty. 6:27. Just before we go tonight, a German Shepherd is set to fly first class with a human escort for a trip back to the US after he was mistakenly shipped to Japan. It's the second pet scandal, is that quite the right word, in 2 days for United Airlines. 10-year-old Ergo was flying with United Airlines from Oregon to Kansas. He's not in Kansas anymore, but when his family went to collect him from the cargo facility at Kansas City, they instead found a Great Dane who was supposed to be on the way to Japan. Whoops, the dogs have both been in Denver, where they were two connecting flights. Ergo ended up in Japan after a 16-hour flight. It comes less than 24 hours after the death of a 10-month-old French bulldog in an overhead bin on another United flight. Linda So from Reuters has more.
This 10-month-old French bulldog named Coquito died on a United Airlines flight Monday after an attendant forced its owners to put the pet in an overhead bin.
He was a really special dog, and it's just sad the way he has to just leave.
11-year-old Sofia Ceballos and her mother Catalina Robledo were on a flight from Houston to New York. Robledo says she placed her dog in a small carrying bag under the seat in front of her, but the flight attendant insisted she put the animal overhead.
I was like, it's a dog, he can't breathe there. And she's like, it doesn't matter. She felt the dog and she put him up there.
The family says they heard the dog barking for 2 hours on the 3.5-hour flight, but then he went silent. They wanted to check on him but couldn't because of turbulence. No one was allowed to get out of their seats. When the flight finally landed, they found Coquito had died.
My mom was crying. She was like screaming there, looking at him.
United has issued an apology saying this was a tragic accident that should never have occurred, as pets should never be placed in the overhead bin. The flight attendant claims she didn't know a dog was in the bag. United has issued a refund to the family, including the $125 pet cabin fee they paid. This isn't the first time the airline has come under scrutiny for its treatment of animals. Last year, the carrier was sued by the owners of a giant rabbit that died on one of its flights.
You couldn't make this stuff up. That's Linda So from Reuters, ending Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for your feedback. Many of you think that Ron Mark can catch an Air Force helicopter wherever he likes, as long as he is doing parliamentary business. We appreciate hearing from you. That is Checkpoint for this evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Defence Minister, Ron Mark, rejects claims he's using the Air Force as a personal taxi service. Winston Peters insists a free trade deal with Russia will not compromise talks with the European Union. Christchurch property owners have been promised quicker settlement of earthquake damage claims, and criticism is mounting over a bogus police traffic checkpoint that targeted euthanasia supporters. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Can white men and women sing the blues? That's the question I'll be posing in this week's New Horizons, prompted by a new album, Downhearted Blues, by Idaho singer Elin Jewell.
My sugar tastes sour, my salt tastes sweet. I want to lay down, but I just can't sleep. It's your
Join me, William Dart, for New Horizons, tonight at 7:30, during Nights with Brian Crump.